I had never had Christmas carolers in my neighborhood before. I think it's one of those bygone traditions that have survived more in pop culture than actual practice. I never doubted that people still do it somewhere, sometimes, but I've never seen it happen in person and never really thought much of it. But on the last winter solstice, I finally heard a roving choir outside my window. I don't think that it was mere happenstance that it was on the winter solstice and not Christmas. You probably know that Yuletide celebrations long predate Christianity, and for that matter, they predate the pagan traditions that Christmas is based on. Regardless of their history or accumulated traditions and associations, all wintertime festivals are fundamentally humanistic in nature. When faced with months of cold and darkness and hardship that some of us, and sometimes many of us, wouldn't survive, we have since time immemorial gathered with our loved ones and let them know how much they mean to us and do what we can to lessen their plight. When faced with famine, we feast. When faced with scarcity, we exchange gifts. We sing in the silence, we make fire in the cold, we decorate in the desolation, and to brighten those longest of nights we string up the most beautiful lights we can make. It is that ancient, ancestral drive to celebrate the best in us and to be at our best at this time of year which explains what I witnessed on that winter's solstice. The singing was quiet at first. So quiet that I hardly noticed it or thought anything of it. But as it slowly grew louder and louder and drew closer and closer, I was eventually prompted to look out my window to see what exactly was going on. It wasn't very late, but it was long enough after sunset that twilight had faded and a gentle snow was wafting down from a silver-gray sky. The only light came from the street lamps and the Christmas decorations, but that was enough to make out the strange troop of cloaked figures making their way down my street. They weren't dressed in modern winter or formal wear, or costumed as Victorian-era carolers, but completely covered in oversized green and scarlet robes. They were so bulky I couldn't infer anything about who, or what, was underneath them, and their faces were completely hidden by their cyclopean hoods. "Martin, babe, can you come here and take a look at this?" I shouted to my husband as I grabbed my phone and tried to record what was going on outside. "Keep your voice down." "I just put Gigi to bed," he said in a soft tone as he came into the living room. "Is that singing coming from outside?" "Yeah, it's a Wassailling or something," I replied. "There's at least a dozen of them out on the street, but they're dressed more like medieval monks, and not singing any Christmas carols I've ever heard. Sounds a bit like a Latin liturgy. They're probably from St. Arius Cathedral. They seem more obsessed than most Catholics with medieval rituals." "I don't think it's any cause for concern," he said as he pulled back the curtain and peered out the window. "That doesn't sound like Latin to me. It's too strange and guttural. Lovecraftian, almost," I said. "Okay, this is weird. I can't get my phone to record any of this." "It's the new AIs they're shoving into everything," Martin said dismissively. "Move fast and break things, right? It's no wonder some people prefer medieval cosplay." According to what I'm sure was a very well-researched viral post on social media, they had more days off than we do. "Martin, I'm being serious. Their chanting is making me feel. I don't know, but something about this isn't right," I insisted, my insides churning with dread as I began to feel lightheaded. Wassailers don't just walk down a random street unannounced, introduce themselves to no one and sing eldritch hymns of madness to the starless void. Just get away from the window, and make sure the doors are locked." "Honey, they're just singing. They're an insular religious sect doing insular religious stuff." "It's fine," Martin said. "Well, they shouldn't be doing it on public property. If they don't take this elsewhere, we should call the cops," I claimed. "Oh, If they let those witches from the yoga center or whatever it is do their rituals in the parks and cemeteries, I'm pretty sure they have to let Saint Areas do this. Otherwise, it's reverse discrimination or some nonsense, Martin countered. They're not from Saint Areas. There, oh good, one of the neighbors is coming out to talk to them. As long as someone's dealing with it. Crouched down as low as I could get, I furtively watched as an older neighbor I recognized but couldn't name walked out of his house and authoritatively marched towards the caroling cult. He started ranting about who they thought they were and if they knew what time it was, and I'm pretty sure he even told them to get off his lawn, but they didn't react to any of it. They just kept on chanting like he wasn't even there. This only made him more irate, and I watched as he got right up into one of their faces. That was a mistake. Whatever he saw there cowed him into silence. With a look of uncomprehending horror plastered on his face, he slowly backed away while clamping his hands over his ears and fervently shaking his head. He only made it a few steps before he dropped to his knees, vomited onto the street and curled up into a fetal position at the Wassailers' feet. None of the Wassailers showed the slightest reaction to any of this. "Oh my God!" I shouted. "Okay, you win. I'll call 911, Martin said softly as he stared out the window in shock. The neighbor's wife came running out of the house, screaming desperately as she ran to her husband's side. She shook him violently in a frantic attempt to rouse him, but he was wholly unresponsive. She glanced up briefly at the Wassailers, but immediately seemed to dismiss any notion of accosting them or asking them for help, so she started dragging her husband away as best she could. "I'm going to go help them." "You call 911, Martin said as he handed me his phone. "No, don't go out there," I shouted. "We don't know what they did to him. They could be dangerous. They just scared him. He's old. The poor guy's probably having a heart attack," Martin said as he started slipping his shoes and coat on. "Then why aren't they helping him? Why are they still singing?" I demanded. "What's going on?" I heard our young daughter Gigi ask. We both turned to see her standing at the threshold of the living room, obviously awoken by all the commotion. "Nothing, sweetie. Just some visitors making more noise than they should." "Go back to sleep," I insisted gently. I heard singing. "Is it for Christmas?" she asked, standing up on her tiptoes and craning her neck to look out the window. Yes, I think so, but it's just a religious thing. They don't have any candy or presents." "Go back to bed," Martin instructed. "I still want to see." "They're dressed funny, and I liked their music," she protested. "Gigi, we don't know who these people are or what they're doing here. This isn't a parade or anything like that. I'm going out to investigate, but you need to stay inside with Mommy," Martin said firmly. "Understood?" Before she could answer, a sudden scream rang out from across the street. Martin burst into action, throwing the door open and running outside, and Gigi went running right after him. "Gigi, no!" I shouted as I chased after her and my husband. It was already chaos out there. Several other people had tried to confront the Wassailers, and ended up in the same petrified condition as the first man. Family and fellow neighbors did their best to help them, and Martin started helping carrying people inside. "Don't look at them. Don't look at their faces," someone screamed. I tried to grab a hold of Gigi and drag her back into the house, but it was too late. We had both looked into the face of a Wassailer, and saw that there wasn't one. Their skull was just a cavernous, vacuous, God-shaped hole with a small glowing wisp floating in the center. Their skin was a mottled, rubbery bluish gray, and from the bottom of their cranial orifices, I'm sure that I saw the base of a pair of tentacles slipping down into their robes. It wasn't just their monstrously alien appearance that was so unsettling, it was that looking upon them seemed to grant some sort of heightened insight or clairvoyance, and I immediately understood why they were chanting. Looking up, I saw an incorporeal being descending from the clouds and down upon our neighborhood. It was a mammoth, amorphous blob of quivering ectoplasm, a myriad of uselessly stubby pseudopods ringing its jagged periphery. Its underside was perforated with thousands of uneven pulsating holes, many of which were filled with the same luminous wisps the Wassailers bore. But nearly as many were clearly empty, meaning it still had room for more. Before losing all control of my body, I clutched Gigi to my chest and held her tightly as we fell to the ground together, rocking back and forth as paralyzing, primal fear overtook us and left us both whimpering, catatonic messes. I tried to keep my daughter from looking up, but as futile as it was, I couldn't resist the urge to gaze upon this horror from some unseen nether that had come to bring ruin upon my home. It was drawing nearer and nearer, but since I had no scale to judge its size, I couldn't say how close it truly was, other than that it was far too close. All the empty holes were opened fully now, ringed rows of teeth glistening like rocks in a titipool as barbed, rasping tongues began to uncoil and stretch downward to ensnare their freshly immobilized prey. I knew there was nothing I could do to save my daughter, so I just kept holding on to her, determined to protect her for as long as I could, until the very end. Now, a commanding voice from among the Wassailers rang out. Snapping my head back towards the ground, I watched as multiple sets of spectral tentacles manifested from out of the Wassailers' backs. They used them to launch themselves into the air before vanishing completely. An instant later, they rematerialized high above us, weaving back and forth as the prehensile tongues of the creature tried to grab them. It was hard to tell for certain what was happening from so far below, but I think I saw the Wassailer stab at the tongues with some manner of bladed weapons, sending pulsating shafts of light down the organs and back into the main body of the entity. The tongues were violently whipped back, and I saw the being begin to quiver, then retch, then cry out in rage and anguish. And then, with barely any warning at all, it exploded. For a moment I thought I was going to drown in this thing's endless viscera, but the outbound splatter rapidly lost cohesion on its descent. I watched it fizzle away into nothing but a gentle blue snow by the time it landed upon me, and even that vanished into nothingness within seconds. One, and only one, of the Wassailers reappeared on the ground, seemingly for the purpose of surveying the collateral damage. He slowly swept his head back and forth, passing his gaze over the immobile but otherwise unharmed bodies of my neighborhood, eventually settling his sight upon me. "You really shouldn't have watched that," he said, but thankfully his tone was more consolatory than condemning. "It was a great galactic ghoul, if you're wondering. Just a baby one, though. They drift across the plains until drawn into a world rich with sapient life, gorge themselves until there's nothing left and they're too fat to leave, then die and throw out some spores in the process to start the whole cycle all over again. We lured that one here, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Opportunities to cull their numbers while they're still small enough are rare, and letting it go would likely have meant sentencing at least one world to death. As awful as this may have been for you to witness, please take some solace in the fact that it was for a good cause." I was still in far too much shock to properly react to what he was saying. That had been, by far, the worst experience of my life, the worst experience of my daughter's life, and he was to blame. How dare he put us through that? How dare he risk not only our lives, but the lives of our entire world, if I was understanding him properly? I should have been livid, I should have been apoplectic, I should have been anything but curious. But I was. Amidst my slowly fading terror, I dimly grasped that he and his fellow Wassailers had risked their own lives to slay a world-ender, and the cosmos at large was better for it. Why? I managed to stammer, still clutching onto my shell-shocked daughter. Why would you subject yourselves to that to save a world you don't even know? 'Tis the season, he replied with a magnanimous nod. I saw him look up as the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles speeding towards us broke the ghastly silence. That would be the containment team. If you'll excuse me, I have no nose and I must kringle, he said as he mimed placing a long, clawed finger on the bridge of imaginary nose before vanishing in a puff of golden sparkles like Santa Claus. In addition to the police cars and ambulances I would have expected to respond to such a bizarre scenario, there were black limos and SUVs, unmarked SWAT vehicles, and what I can only assume was some sort of mobile laboratory. As the paramedics and police attended to us, paramilitary units and field researchers swarmed over our neighborhood. They trampled across every yard, searched every house, and confiscated anything they deemed necessary. I was hesitant to give an account of what had happened to the police, of course, but they weren't the least bit skeptical. They just told me that that was over their heads now, and that I should save my story for the special circumstances provision. After we had been treated, we all gave our accounts to the agents, and they administered some medication that they said would help with the trauma. It was surprisingly effective, and I'm able to look back on what happened with complete detachment, almost like it happened to someone else. My daughter, husband, and most of my other neighbors were affected even more strongly. They either don't remember the incident at all or think it was some kind of dream. I'm grateful for that, I guess, especially for my daughter, but I don't want to forget what happened. I don't want to forget that on the night I encountered a cosmic horror of unspeakable power, I saw someone stand up to it. Not fellow humans, per se, but fellow people, fellow sapient beings who decided that an uncaring universe was no excuse for being uncaring themselves. And ultimately, that's what the holiday season is all about.